is not a mystery. It is not a medical disaster. It is a bodily process because your body knows what to do. Your body knows how to die. How cool is that? In the last month of your life, you're going to stop getting out of bed. You're going to eat and drink a lot less, and you're going to sleep a lot more. Now, delirium is very common. Time stops being real. Is that something that you've been feeling?
Yes.
Okay, 2 to 3 weeks out, you're going to need help with all daily activities. But my favorite part of the dying process.
Amy!
I know, I've been talked to about my enthusiasm. I should dial it back, sorry. Should I keep going?
Yeah.
Your body knows what's coming, and it goes into a state of ketosis, which decreases hunger and pain, and it increases the sense of euphoria. And when you start active dying.
What's active dying?
Oh, active dying is a sacred time. At least it used to be, and it still is in some parts of the world. It's the moment when you're very close to death and your body starts shutting down. I'm looking at you, Gail.
If Molly wants to hear it, I could hear it. You guys, come here.
I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. And when you are very close to death, your breathing goes into a cycle of deep, slow breaths and long pauses. And then eventually there is a breath out that is not followed by a breath in. And that's it.
Hey, can you make sure that my mouth isn't open when I die? Okay.
You know, too much pain or you're just done. You can talk to me about sedating you, but then you'll be unconscious.
I want to feel everything for as long as I can.
Okay, good. Wait, I forgot to tell you about the rally. The last week of life, some people experience what's called the rally. And it's this just surge of energy and mental clarity. So enjoy the rally. Just know that you're another step closer to death, okay?
I fucking love your vibe, Amy. You're nuts, man.
Okay, I have the first dose here for you. Gonna ease your pain. It's gonna make your breathing so much easier.
You know what? Honestly, it's not that fucking serious. Let's get this show on the road. Kind of excited. You know how many plans and trips I had to cancel because I wasn't feeling well? And now it's like, I get to go on a trip that's just for me.
Yeah. Okay.
No, not just you. I am so grateful for you. You're my favorite person in the whole wide world.
Okay.
Would like to hear about what happens when you are dying. It's good enough for me. Death is not a mystery. It is not a medical disaster. It is a bodily process because your body.
Okay. So that's my opener. Did everybody pretty much get to see it and hear it? I love that. I forget the name of the movie. It's just out now, I think, on Netflix. But I want to be Nurse Amy, and I'm going to start being a little bit like her and just tell it like it is. I thought she was fabulous. Okay, so let me get my slides up here and we'll get started. Turn the screen. Well, I don't think I can get. Oh, wait, here we go. Play. All right. So let's get this started. Okay. So going, gone. So let's start with talking about how we die. There's two ways that we die. The first way is sudden. So think of a heart attack, an accident, you get run over by a bus. That's sudden. You're here one moment and you're gone the next. And but the most common and the one that we see at ABODE, and most of us here, probably 80% of us here, will have the gradual process, which has a very flexible timetable. That means we're going to die from a disease or just old age. And, the one thing I really try to get across to people, dying is not a medical event. We've been dying since the beginning of man. And we haven't had hospice nurses or doctors or anybody there to help us. Families took care of each other, and dying was a spiritual event, and it was a communal event, and families took care of each other, and we saw it in our homes, and probably generations, probably not too many, because back in the day, we didn't live that long, but the family was around. So we became very familiar with what death looked like. And nowadays, we've taken death away from the beds or the home, and we've taken it away from being common in our lives. And it moved to the hospital, and it became very mysterious. And when I was an ICU nurse back in the day, we would let people come and see their loved one on the odd hour for a half hour. And then they had to go out in the waiting room. And so they didn't get to spend time with their loved one. Their loved one, laid in bed and basically died alone. So luckily with the hospice movement, we're bringing death back into the home, and we're making it a more communal, more family-centered event. So when people die, it's not like you're here one day and gone the next. It's a process. And when Barbara Carnes, who I get most of my information from, she is the mother of hospice nurses. And she started, when she started doing hospice work back in I think this was back in the late 70s, she noticed a pattern. And she wrote the book called Gone From My Sight. And in that book, she talks about this process that she just kept seeing over and over and over again. And so we're going to talk about that process. So 1 to 3 months before someone is dying, and sometimes they don't even know when they're going to die. None of us do. My patients on hospice, they don't know that, when they're going to die. They just know that, it's going to be sooner than later. But that 1 to 3 months, we start seeing changes. And the first thing we start seeing is withdrawal. And that means that they're not as engaging with their families as they were before, or they don't want to visit. They don't want to socialize. They just want to kind of be by themselves. And that's the beginning of separation. During this time, they're processing their life. There's a less of a need to communicate. When I start interviewing my new patients for hospice, and even, when I'm talking to my patients that have been on for a while, I start asking, what do you have the energy for? Do you enjoy visiting? Are you being social? Often the wife or the spouse will pull me aside and say, he doesn't want to talk to anybody. My son calls and he doesn't want to talk to him, or if he does, he just says hello and he's done. So there's less of a need to communicate. And we believe that words equal being connected with the physical life that's preparing to be left behind. I think there's a spiritual awareness also during this time. The soul kind of knows that it's happening. We, or the people that are dying, aren't really consciously aware of it, but I believe that their soul knows. And so it's preparing them for this. So they're starting to withdraw. They don't want to talk as much. And then also these folks have a real sense of peace. I rarely see I do sometimes, but I rarely see someone who's really afraid at this point. They know it's coming and they're just kind of making peace with it. Consciously, they may not confront it, but subconsciously, it's always there. It's always there. The next thing that I start to look for is their eating pattern. At 1 to 3 months, food starts to lose they start losing their interest in food. I'm thinking today, I went and saw a patient. His name is Randy, and Randy's got lung cancer, and he has been diagnosed. He got diagnosed at the end of last summer. And when I saw him today, he was eating about 1 meal a day, which was good. He's been doing that since Christmas, but now he said, I have no interest. They keep bringing me food, and he said, it just doesn't do anything for me. I'm not hungry. I don't want to eat it, but I know I should. Because, we eat to live, I live to eat, but we're supposed to eat to live. And when someone either consciously or subconsciously knows they're dying, they know that where they're going, food isn't needed. Food grounds us to this place that we live. And where we're going, where they're going, food is not important. And this is really, really hard for loved ones to understand. And this is probably the most common hospice question I get asked is, he's not eating. Why won't he eat? I cook everything he loves. I cook everything she loves, and then she won't eat. And so, it's just a normal thing. And, I just have to help their loved ones and the caregivers of my patients understand that, it's not personal. I know you put a lot of work into the food, but it's just not important to them anymore. When a body's preparing to die, it's perfectly natural for eating to stop. And gradually the appetite declines and it goes away. I tell them that it's okay not to eat. A different energy is needed now, a spiritual energy, not a physical one. Also, we'll talk about sleep here in a minute, but I was telling Randy today that you'll find that food doesn't energize you, but sleep does. So we've gone now from 1 to 3 months, now 1 to 2 weeks. So during those 1 to 3 months, we're withdrawing, we're not eating as much. And so at 1 to 2 weeks, they have some disorientation. They often, will wake from sleep and just kind of feel out of it for a little bit. And I tell them that they literally have 1 foot in each world. 1 foot's there, 1 foot's here. And there are times those 2 worlds seem to collide and they don't know what's real and what's not real. And it will take a few moments, but then they come back. Often during these times where they're a little disoriented, they reference that they have to go somewhere. They have to pack. And I even see this in my patients with disorientation or with dementia. Dementia, they're still eating, during this time, but not eating as much. But I have often have them tell me they'll hold onto a bag and say they've got to go somewhere, or they're waiting for someone to pick them up. I had a little lady that would get up at night and put all of her clothes in grocery bags. And in the morning, her caregivers would put them away. And then a couple nights later, she would get up in the middle of the night and put all of her clothes in grocery bags because she knew she was going somewhere. During these 1 to 2 weeks, they will sleep most of the time, but they can be easily awakened. Or, they might sleep 18 hours a day or 20 hours a day. And so often as their hospice nurse, I'll come into the home and ask them, how much are you sleeping? You know, how many hours a day are you sleeping, and how much has this changed? And so this is really important for me to know, and that kind of helps me gauge their decline and how close we are. Many of you have heard me talk about surrender. And surrender comes during these final weeks. People will try to avoid having to go into briefs and go into pull-ups. They don't want to be bedbound. They still want to get up and take that shower, or they don't want to, they're losing energy to walk to the bathroom. So we've moved a bedside commode to the side of the bed, and they resist and they go to the bathroom and they start falling down. And so surrender is something I talk about all my patients with at the right time. Because when they start to resist, making life easy, like they don't want to use that bedside commode, or they don't want that hospital bed. I'm fine in my bed, but I see that we're going to be bedbound in the next couple, right within the week. I will insist that we get a hospital bed so that we can safely take care of them without hurting ourselves. But I talk about surrender. Surrender is our final lesson in this lifetime. We have lessons all through our lives, but the final one is surrender, and lean into this dying thing that's coming, because you can't stop it. You can't postpone it. You can't delay it. It's coming. It's almost as if there's a switch that turns internally. And, a slide or two back, I talked about the soul kind of knows. And I think when the soul knows, they turn the switch, because we start seeing these patterns of behavior. So a couple of stories about surrender. I had a gentleman, I'll call him Bob, and he was an executive. He was a CEO of a company and very with it. And he was dying from prostate cancer. And he started realizing that the struggle getting to the toilet, the struggle getting dressed every day, the struggle that just getting up and living was for him. And so he realized that, in the next day or two, he was going to be bedbound. So he said, okay, you said I'm going to need a hospital bed, so let's get that ordered. And we'll make arrangements tonight and make room for it. And his children were there. His boys had flown in, and he said, now I know I'm going to have to be in a diaper. So if you can show my boys how to change me, that way they'll be prepared. So I said, sure. So he laid on the bed, and I went out to my car and I brought diapers in, and he had his, his clothes on, and I showed his sons how to change or put a diaper on him, turning side to side. And we all got comfortable with it. And he said, okay. And he just dreaded this, and I could tell. So the next day, the hospital bed was coming. So I was getting ready to make my visit, and I got a call from his wife. Bob died that morning. And he had surrendered to all of this, but he wasn't going to do it. And he signed out. So this is a really important lesson, and just know it's coming. At 1 to 2 weeks, they're not eating much anymore now. They are drinking mostly. They'll take sips of water. They'll take sips of whatever. I often tell my families, even earlier, even to get them to eat, don't worry about nutrition. Just worry about content and whatever makes them happy. It's all about joy and comfort now. So when my patients aren't eating and they're drinking, sometimes they want only soda or Kool-Aid or a beer or wine. And I'm just tell them whatever you want is fine. It doesn't matter. As long as we're soothing that parched mouth, and fluid is fluid. I had a patient once, I went into the home and he was sitting on the sofa. He had gallbladder cancer and he was pretty miserable. Um, couldn't eat much, really bad appetite. Fluid was building up in his belly. And he was sitting there sipping on a drink and he would make faces. And I said, "What are you drinking?" And he said, "I'm drinking Pedialyte." And I said, "Oh, do you like it?" And he was like, "It's awful." And I said, "What do you want?" And he said, "I want a Pepsi. I want a Pepsi on ice." And I said, "Is there any Pepsi in the fridge?" And he said, "I think so." So I took his Pedialyte and I dumped it out and I filled his cup with ice and I brought him a Pepsi. And he said, "My wife's going to be really mad because we were told that the sugar feeds the cancer." And I just kind of looked at him and I said, "Okay, well, what do you think about that?" And he just said, "That damn cancer is not going to win." So he poured that Pepsi in that glass and he drank it down, and he was happy, and I saw joy. And he couldn't drink it a lot of it, but every day I came back to see him, he had a Pepsi and he would just sip on it, and he was so thankful. During this time, when they are stopping eating and they're drinking mostly, they the families will still push food and will get very angry with them. And again, I hear this. And so I almost always have to give them permission not to eat because they will often do it to please their loved ones. During this time, we also start seeing incontinence. We're starting to use diapers and pull-ups. Getting to the bathroom is a struggle. They just don't have the legs to get there. Bedside commodes are often used, but they often now need help to just stand and pivot and sit down. So they're, for the most part, mostly bedbound. They know they're dying. They're often getting very impatient now. They're saying, "How much longer? Tell me that I'm going to go soon. Why is it taking so long?" And when they can still sit up and talk to me and have conversations, I still know we have a bit of airspace left before we're going to land the plane. And but they get very impatient. Laying in bed all day is not fun. And so as time goes on, they start sleeping more, and they are semi-conscious. They're starting to lapse into coma. They can still hear us. They can still feel touch. Touch and presence is so important during this time. Families, when their loved one doesn't want to talk much, they're sleeping all the time. There's no meals to prepare. There's just mouth care. They're just like, "I don't know what to do." And I said, "Just sit with them. You don't need to talk. You don't need to do anything. Just sit. Crochet, knit, read, whatever you want to do. But just your touch and your presence is so important." And we love to do this at ABODE. Our volunteers will often come in and say, "What can I do?" And to just sit and be with people who are dying is so important. And then Nurse Amy talked about the rally. She was so excited about that. During this time, when your loved one hasn't eaten, they're sipping on just little bits of water or fluids, and they're sleeping most of the time. You may go in one morning and they are awake and they want to eat and they're asking questions. And I'll walk in and they'll say to me, "It's a miracle. They're back. They're back." And we'll talk about the rally. And the rally is just this surge of energy that they get. And we're not sure where it comes from. Not everybody gets it. It can be very subtle. I had a patient that died last week, and she'd been pretty unconscious or semi-conscious for days. She would open her eyes and she would smile, but she'd go right back to sleep. And she died on a Saturday. So the Thursday before she died, I was in visiting with her, and she was asking about the weather. And then her husband said that she'd been up since like 6 in the morning, and they'd been sharing all their vacations and fun stories with each other. And you remember this? And she'd laugh and she'd say, yeah. And he just was so thrilled that he got these last few moments with her. By that afternoon, she was unconscious and she never woke up again. So as the days go on, the rally can happen 2 to 3, 4 days prior to death. After the rally, we start to see this behavior. We call it terminal restlessness or terminal agitation. And that's when your loved one becomes very just restless. They are and try to get out of bed. They'll be reaching up in the sky like they see somebody. They'll talk to people who aren't there. Sometimes they shout. They're picking at the bedclothes. They're taking off their clothes. I had this one patient, Miss Betty, and I tell you, she was prim and proper. She wore pearls. She was like Beaver Cleaver's mom, and she just dressed always so well. And she went through her terminal restlessness, and she had these beautiful nightgowns. Well, she'd tear those off. She'd tear off her slips, and we'd often find her just naked in the bed. Well, she lived in an assisted living, and everybody loved her, and she had visitors all day long, but we never knew what she was going to do. And I didn't want her to be embarrassed and lose her dignity. So we kind of limited her visitors during this time because she couldn't keep clothes on. So after this terminal restlessness ends, which will last about 24 to 36 hours, and it is a marathon. Oftentimes family members are just exhausted when this is over because they've been at the bedside doing and helping and putting back for hours. The morphine that hospice brings out and another drug called lorazepam that we bring out really help with this agitation, but they often break through it. So during this time, we do give a lot of meds, trying to just calm them down. Once we calm them down and we start seeing the changes, active dying is starting now. Just as in labor, I like to talk about dying with labor, like having a child. So the mom is in labor, she's having labor pains, and she really feels it. And that's where we've been up to this point. They're having labor pains. The dying process has started. Pretty soon, we're going to start pushing. And so when we're about ready to start pushing, this is what I start seeing. The respirations will change. Respirations will now become very, they'll be fast, and then they'll slow down and stop. And then they'll start up again. So we get this very irregular pattern of breathing. And sometimes the breathing can become very shallow where you almost can't tell if they're breathing. And then sometimes it'll just be like big heaves. So just changes in respirations I get my families ready for. Heart rate. So during this time, as a hospice nurse, I only worry about heart rate and temperature. Because the heart rate, when a person's dying, you would think, it makes sense, the heart rate would get slower, 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 and stop. But the opposite happens. It gets faster, 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 faster. And so I often will use this as a tool to teach my families how the dying process is going. Almost everybody now has one of those pulse oximeters in their houses, and they'll put them on their loved one's fingers and say, oh my gosh, yeah, yesterday his heart rate was 84. Today it's 96. And then the next day it's 106. And then it's going to be 120. So we watch for that heart rate to get faster and faster. It will usually level off around 130, 140. Not often does it get much faster than that, but it can. So they're in active labor now. They're getting ready to push. The adrenaline and the norepinephrine, those hormones inside their bodies, are surging right now. And their skin can become very warm, very clammy, because they're working hard inside. And so at this point, we take a temperature, and about 40% of patients who are actively dying will get a terminal fever. And that fever can be anywhere from 100 degrees. I've had as high as 104.5. So in every one of the little kits that we have in the home, the hospice drug kit, there are Tylenol suppositories just for this. We don't understand why people fever. We believe that maybe the temperature center of the brain has been knocked out, is no longer functioning normally, and so they can't regulate their temperature anymore. So the fever may last until death. So we'll continue to medicate, because I don't know about you, but when I have a fever, I don't feel good. I get achy and don't feel very well. When you look at your loved one during this time, they may have a very sunken, very sallow appearance. And this is caused from terminal dehydration. They're no longer drinking much, but they've been peeing. And I often get the question, why are they still peeing? They haven't had anything to drink in 3 days. Well, the body is trying to dehydrate itself and get rid of all that extra fluid so that the dying process is easier. When you die dry, you don't have secretions getting in your airway. You don't have trouble swallowing because there's nothing to swallow. The body just knows it needs to be dry to be comfortable. So when patients or families force fluids on them, or they have an IV, or they have a feeding tube and get tube feedings put in, they aren't allowed to die dry. And so their dying process gets very loud, and they get gurgly. There's lots of lung secretions. I've had people so wet that when I turn them, it rolls out of their mouth and their nose. It's very uncomfortable. So this is why the body is so smart, and it says, you know what, I'm not going to eat or drink anymore. I'm going to get ready for my trip. And so terminal dehydration is where we want to be. And that's why, the hospice comes in and says, we're not worried about them drinking anymore or eating anymore, because we know that this is a natural process. We know that this provides comfort. So just know that dying is not painful. The disease is painful. So if a person has cancer or a disease that brought them a lot of pain and a lot of discomfort, we are going to continue to medicate for pain during this time. Even though this person is no longer responsive, they're not telling me they're hurting, but the disease is still there. So we will continue to give them pain medication during the dying process. So hours before someone dies, there are some very significant changes. This breathing is continuing. The heart rate is very high now. And now I start to look at the skin, and the body is beginning to circulate blood to the central core to keep itself alive. And so the heart and the lungs are continuing to get most of the blood and the oxygen, and it's squeezing down on the legs and the arms. And so we start seeing discoloration in the legs and the arms mostly, and that's called mottling. It happens on the feet, is where I look for it, and around the knees. And it looks like a cobblestone pattern and these little purple splotches. And elbows, knees, the feet. If I were to turn them over, I would kind of sometimes see it on the sacrum. And then they start breathing much differently. The face relaxes. the mouth is open. That's why the young lady in the video I showed said to her friend, make sure my mouth is closed. I don't want to die with my mouth open, because that's a very common thing, because the body relaxes and the mouth opens. And now they start breathing like a fish out of water. So the mouth is open, their head's back, and they're going. Breathing gets very slow now. Maybe 4 times a minute, maybe 3 times a minute. Or they may have a very long pause. And then we'll see little breaths in between those pauses if we were able to put them on a monitor. But from what we can see, sitting at the bedside, we just see these breaths and then nothing, and these breaths and then nothing. And it becomes very, it's like a watching game for the families, because they're watching and they're counting, and they think, oh my God, this is the last breath. And then they take another breath. And this could go on for 12 hours. And so again, watching someone die and being present is very exhausting. Much like it is when a woman's having a baby and everybody's waiting for that baby to come. Her labor can last a long time. People will often tell me that aren't able to be there to witness. I wish I would have been there. I just stepped out for a minute. But I just want everyone to hear this. If the dying wants you there, you'll be there. Many times they just need their own personal space to go. Maybe they think that you can't handle it. And so they're going to wait until you step out before they go. So breathing becomes more irregular, and then they take their last breath. And death occurs. So when someone dies, when I'm doing my teaching and I'm talking to my families, when I tell them that the moment of death, the first thing you do is nothing. Do not do anything. There's no emergency. There's no rush to do anything. Just sit in this holy, sacred space. I don't know if you guys can see this picture I have here. It is a picture of our first shrouding at ABODE. We took a guest and shrouded their body and put flowers on it. So we shrouded this body. This was a holy, sacred space. In this space, there's undescribable stillness and calm. And I just tell them, sit with your loved one. This is going to be the last moments that you're going to be with them. And when you're ready, call hospice. And we'll come and take care of everything else from that point on. During this time, rituals are important. Some people bathe, shroud, cover the body in flowers. Often a prayer vigil until the funeral home arrives. Whatever you'd like to do, but there's no rush. So I'm going to end this with Snoopy. And Charlie Brown says, someday we will all die, Snoopy. And Snoopy says, true, but on the other days, we will not. So I'm going to stop here. And come back to all of you. And I'm going to open this up to questions. So if you're muted, be sure to unmute. And I'll take questions now. Everyone's pretty quiet. Did I scare y'all?
Beverly,
I don't have a question, but I've just been through this very recently, and you just nailed it right on the head. And I wish I had known. I would have done things so differently. And the hospitals don't say, "Oh, he's dying," or you can drink all the Pepsi that you want. They, they don't tell you.
No, you know, Terry, taking some care of someone who's dying is very different than taking care of someone who's going to get well. And
Yeah.
hospitals just do not do a good job because they're there for the living. They're there to make people better. And, we need to do a lot more of this teaching in the hospitals and get the nurses ready. When I was an ICU nurse, or yeah, I'm going to tell you about this one night. I was in Colorado, and I was working at McKee Medical Center, and we had um, a really bad snowstorm, and we were all kind of trapped there for about 3 days. We didn't have any relief, and people were dying, but had a lot of people coming in from car accidents and people who couldn't stay at home anymore because their electricity was out. And so the people that we had in the ICU that were actively dying, we moved them to the end of the hallway so we could take care of the living. And those people who were dying were basically left alone. A nurse would check on them periodically, but we just had no idea. I had no idea. And I think, having worked ICU and working cardiac and heart failure for many, many years, I saw so many terrible deaths. And it just, as Edwin told me, it was moral trauma that I experienced. And I decided to change that. And I think that's what put on my heart to become a hospice nurse, because I knew we could do a better job. I knew that people deserve better, because we don't talk about dying in the hospital, even though we know it's right there in front of us. It's a hard word to say. What else can I tell you about this experience? Having cared for many, many years, I've been a nurse for a very long time. And, this is probably the most important job I've ever had. The autonomy is beautiful. And to teach people what's going to happen. And if they know what's happening, there's less fear. They'll call me and say, "Oh, it's happening." The wife will call me or the husband will call me and say, "Oh, it's happening." And that's so comforting to me, because they're not surprised. I rarely have I had a patient say to me, "What do you mean he's dying?" Which happens to other nurses. Sure. Yeah, Sandy.
So for those folks who end up having a wet death,
Mhm.
is there anything, if we're there to help them and care for them, is there anything on our end that we can do?
That's a great question. I think we recently had a patient like this at ABODE,
Yeah.
and that was a question John had. Unfortunately, there's not a lot we can do to make it go away quickly. But the best thing is to turn them on their sides so
Okay.
that those fluids don't pool in their throat and choke them. So if we keep them on their sides, the fluids can roll out. And then in hospice, in that little comfort kit, that little kit that we provide, there are drying agents in it. We often use atropine eye drops. So we have little bottles of atropine drops that we will put under the tongue to dry out secretions. And if you ever work at ABODE, or if a hospice is ever in your home with a loved one, and you see that they've brought you a box of eye drops, those eye drops go in the mouth, not in the eyes. And it was a hospice nurse that figured this out, because we know that atropine dries people out pretty significantly. And so hospice said, well, let's try using these atropine drops and putting them under the tongue. And sure enough, it started drying out the secretions. We also use a drug called hyoscine, and then scopolamine patches that we use behind the ear to dry people out.
You okay?
And then we often will bring suction to the bedside, and it's only the hard kind of suction that you can get in the mouth.
Okay.
You don't go down the throat with the suction catheters, because we can induce a gag and cause them to vomit, and then we could aspirate. So we try to avoid that. I've done that a few times on the hospice side when I know my gag is gone, and I'll go down and get secretions out. I had a patient, I'm going to share this quick story with you. She was at home, her family adored her, and she had a feeding tube. And I would say even 2 weeks before her death, I had started saying, I think we need to stop the feedings. They were making her feel bad. They were making her nauseated, giving her diarrhea, but the family just wouldn't stop. And this is a really a key point. If you have if you're any doulas here in the group, or if you have a loved one and you're trying to push food on them and they don't want it, but they're going to eat it for you because they love you, and you're telling them you're going to die if you don't eat, well, they're going to try. But what you're going to induce is nausea and diarrhea. That's the body's way of saying, I can't handle this, because things are starting to shut down as the dying process starts. So anyway, she was having diarrhea and nausea, and they kept that feeding going until about 2 days before her death. And I've never looked at anybody so scared, because she was literally drowning. We would turn her, and I would suction her as much as I could and just do as much as I could to dry her out. And finally, I just sedated her, just knocked her out. Family wasn't happy about it, but I just didn't want to see her suffer anymore.
Thank you.
So,
Because Wayne and I once had when we were sub-navigating ABODE, once had someone who very, very wet death. And we were freaking out. We really didn't know what to do, but I don't guess there was really anything that we could do specifically, given that, we were pretty young. I mean, young, you know what I mean, fairly recently out of doula school. So thanks.
Did you have a question?
Yes, Rudy and I were just here talking, wondering about the process that at the end, the shrouding, because, we're going through this with our friend Betty, and the shrouding and the rituals, and how we can kind of prepare for that as this kind of care team that we have. Any recommendations? And she identifies as a Buddhist as well. So
love this.
So
Yes, on the call tonight.
yes.
So yeah, we can absolutely.
I'm trying to unmute. I'd be happy to help with that.
Okay, wonderful.
Yes, I can talk with the care team, and that would be awesome. We can do that for her.
Her end of life plan is to come to ABODE when she's close. And I think she might be next on the list for a bed.
Okay.
Yeah. So we will absolutely do that. The picture that was in the, I don't know if you saw the slides very well. I think maybe our pictures were there, but we did our first shroud.
Yes, that was beautiful.
Yeah. It's just so lovely, and the funeral homes are fine with it. They'll take the body away shrouded, and so it's lovely.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Well, we have reached 7:30. Oh, it might be weird, but I love talking about death. You know, I say this when I teach. I don't know if you guys saw the Barbie movie. And in the Barbie movie, there's this scene where Barbie's dancing in the disco and she says something like, you know what, we're all going to die one day. And the party stops and they all look at her. And, you know, and so everybody said that's me. Because, you know, when I go to a party and they're like, what do you do? I'm like, I'm a hospice nurse and a doula. And I will talk death all night. So my friends just roll their eyes at me and say, oh my God, it's Beverly. Okay. Let's humor her.
Thank you for speaking it for the rest of us.
You're welcome. So I thank you all for coming tonight, and we'll see you next week at the same time. We are going to have Courtney with us next week. Courtney is going to talk about death through the ages in art. So she's going to share art and how art has portrayed dying and death. And it's beautiful. So if there are no more questions, we'll see you all next week, and have a beautiful rest of your week.